Good. Okay. Well, I'll just begin. So, as we've discussed in a little bit here, this is about Rapa Nui. This chat is titled 2 Decades of Contact with Polynesia, Working Alongside the Rapa Nui. As I was introduced, my name's Dr. Dale F. Simpson Jr. I'm an associate professor at North Central College, my first year here, but I've been at the College DuPage going on 13 years. I'm also the director of both the Rapa Nui Geochemical Project and Illinois Simpson Archaeology. And most recently, I was elected to the board of the Chicago Archaeological Society. Please have a look at any of these institutions. They are doing their best to, sort of outreach archaeological education to the public. As always, I need to say thank you to the COD's Humanities Department and the organizers of the fest, especially Tim, Adam, and Josh, who've done an outstanding job to get a lot of key speakers to sort of discuss, why this field is so important and how once you study in the humanities and social sciences, you tend to have a better life because you understand how complex it is. So I thank everyone there. I always start out with a land acknowledgement and a call to country, and it'll sort of start this idea of contact. I'm going to talk about contact in 2 places, one in Illinois and then one in Rapa Nui. So I'd like to honor Illinois' traditional land custodians, both past and present, both near and far. This is very important. Now, I don't list any specific groups because what we have to realize is that Illinois has no federally recognized tribes. It's one of the most complex things that happen. And as we start in the beginning of the sort of beaver wars and the start of the fur trade industry between the Brits and the French and what would become America, we see groups slowly getting pushed out to the West. And groups that normally, like, for example, the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee, they start to really put pressure in other areas, especially expanding their fur trade networks. And as they do that, groups that normally were in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, they're slowly getting pushed, right? And they're having to come into other areas where groups were already living and people had already had ways of life for thousands of years. So you can see just from 1649 to 1680, just how these groups reduced in size in their territories, and also how they moved greatly to the west of Lake Michigan. By 1701, you can see we have some main groups and tribal affiliations that we could mention to acknowledge them. The Illini is one of them, the Kickapoo, the Ho-Chunk. We also have groups like the Potawatomi, who later come in another migration in the 1760s. So this sort of map shows us that contact at times between the outside world and groups, indigenous groups that live in their lands are at times contacted the wrong way, and their lives change. And I think that's even sadder when we think about what happened after the Indian Removal Acts in 1830. Here we not only have the Trail of Tears of groups that are moving through the southern United States, but are forcibly being moved out into Oklahoma and other quote unquote Indian territory. And this was just absolutely horrible. And this was probably the reason why we have the Black Hawk War in the United States, specifically Illinois and Wisconsin, is because these groups have nowhere else to go. And what happens then by 1841 is we have groups all the way on the other side of the Mississippi. They are in lands of Plains natives that have already been living there. That starts the conflict. More groups start to move out. So this call to country and understanding this long-term trajectory is very important. These are the lessons we need to be teaching to understand it's not only about colonialism in this state of Illinois. There are proud groups that still try to hold on to their roots, still try to hold on to their people, and we must respect them. But as some have critiqued, calls to country only go so far. And that's sort of important because, you know, some people have critiqued, yeah, it's great, we can come on our high horse and say, hey, we're sitting on the lands of the Kickapoo, of the Sauk, of the Fox, of the Illini, the Potawatomi, but we need to do something about it, right? So I challenge you to think about what can you do to better understand contact, right? Whether it be in the colonial United States or in the world, what can you do? And I just want to suggest 3 things you can do to better educate yourself. One is to visit the Elmhurst History Museum, where they have an exhibit on now called The Peoples of the Prairie. This is an outstanding exhibit that highlights 12,000 years of history in DuPage County. They've used a variety of archaeological data and materials, using artifacts from multiple collections, and then also highlighting the, you know, the contact and post-contact and contemporary phase. So I believe this is open until the summer. Definitely run in there and have a look. Or you can join our Native American group at COD, our Native American Study Committee. And we have, through the work of John Paris and all of the committee members, we've set up a very relevant and timely discussion about residential schools and how Natives not only live through the absolute horrors of being there, but also their stories of survival and how these groups still live today. And that's one thing I'll talk about the Rapa Nui people. They went through a lot. They went through genocide and ethnocide and slavery, but they're still here today. Then if you want to continue your degree from COD and come to North Central College, we have a BA in anthropology, and one of our classes that I teach this semester is Anthro 355, which is Native Nations of North America. And we are very active in using anthropological discourse, examples throughout archaeology, biological anthropology, linguistics, and cultural anthropology to better understand you know, what these groups have gone through. And if we honor our traditional owners, they've been here for 15,000 years, in Illinois for about 11 to 12,000. So we really need to reset sometimes our colonial clock and understand what contact did to groups in the United States. Now, that took me about 10 minutes. What I'm more interested in talking about is my contact on Easter Island. I basically went there in 2001 on a field school. I went there with the University of Hawaii, led by this man right here, Dr. Terry Hunt. And this ugly, funny-looking guy right here is Dale Simpson. In this group, there were a variety of scholars that came out of this field school that still study in the Pacific. But it was my first time that I was away from my mom and dad. The first time I was studying at the time in Canada. I got a wrestling scholarship to go to Canada. I went to study business and ended up finding anthropology. And I find that quite interesting. For those that you haven't declared a major and you're still looking, don't worry, your time will come, your contact will come. But sometimes it comes from events like this. Now, this is 2001, and this is Dale Jr. made into a Lego figure from a TV show that we did on the History Channel called Found. And it's been a long progression to come from this young guy to now I'm 43 years old. Now, why they made this figure is that I'm sort of notorious for being in the field and being a dirt junkie, always getting my hands dirty, always trying to really put my boots on the ground and to really understand prehistory by being there. I'm definitely not an armchair anthropologist or sort of as I call them, a commercial anthropologist, or even a solo, only a teaching anthropologist. I do research as well, and I have multiple projects going on. But to work with the community, to do these projects and to get your boots on the ground, you have to build rapport and respect with the community you live with. So for years now, I have participated in a variety of events with the community, with elders, with children, with other archaeologists, with guides. And I've slowly tried to build that relationship up. So in anthropology, as you go into the field and do your field work, you know, one of the most important things is you build rapport. Once you build rapport and people trust you, then they'll be better informants and they'll respect you, you respect them. And that's how we can sort of cross borders after contact. And that's something I'll sort of highlight today. Now, there are 3 ways that I've really tried to increase my rapport and respect in the community. And I've discussed these activities elsewhere, but the three main points I want to raise in my first half here is how I participated in environmental activism, educational outreach, and fieldwork, investigation, publication, and presentation. Now, I have talked about this in the 8th annual Integrity and Research Conference held by COD. And then if you also want to look up the strategic hotbox, I also talk a little bit about these three activities and how I do them. But I just want to show you some photos. The first one, most people believe Rapa Nui is completely deforested. It has no trees because they cut them all down to move the statues. Well, that's not true. Most of the trees were gone because of the Williamson and Bulford sheep herding company that was there and cut down, or the sheep basically ate all the roots while the rest of the trees are being cut down for fuel. But the islanders are well aware of that, and they probably also practice some forest mitigation. Well, here is a group we bring out with the kiddos. This is organized by CONAF, which is Rapa Nui's sort of forestry and park service. And here we planted thousands of trees. This was back in 2014. And from what I understand, this entire bay has now been reforested. So this is how you get past contact, is you show the people you're interested in the kiddos. But when you usually work with them, usually they just make fun of you. They call you by names. But when the parents see you working side by side and helping it increases your rapport. We also work with AMD, or anthropogenic marine debris. This is a big topic on Rapa Nui because although our research shows that we have about 20% coming from local sources on the island, things like cigarette butts and some beer bottles and plastic, the majority of things come from the outside world, especially from industrial fishing, both illegal and legal fishing. We have a lot of mesoplastics and microplastics. So we filled up an entire bag of these microplastics and mesoplastics in about 20 minutes. But we have other sort of containers and hard plastics that have come from all over the world, like New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, and we're constantly fighting this battle. But what we're trying to do is, instead of putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm and having these cleanups over and over and over again, what we're trying to do is practice the 7 R's of recycling to avoid the banned items that are on the plastic ban list. We're trying to improve our habits. And you can see more about that in other videos if you're interested. But this is something that I came in and spearheaded to use archaeology to basically understand these deposits, weighing them, classifying them, and it gives us a better understanding about what's happening out there. But my favorite thing to do, obviously, as I'm teaching here, is to educate and to do outreach and to show people the importance of presenting sort of social sciences and the hard sciences to people. So one project is through Brett Shepherdson at Northern Arizona University. This is Brett right here. And for the last, now this is a little bit old, this 15 years, I think it's going on 17 years. Brett and others have directed field work for students. We take 2 weeks, we take them around the island, we investigate, we show them how it is to take notes and take measurements. They then produce a project, and most of these have been online. You can go to Brett's page, teravaca.org, and you can see some of the activity that we do. And this has really built a lot of great rapport for us to show the community that we're serious about not only the statues, not only the archaeological remains, but we're still very much interested in the living people and their descendants. One of my favorite projects that I worked through my PhD was called Manu'iti, which means the messenger birds. And here we have sort of two components of this project. One is theory, where we talk about in the class like this in a typical PowerPoint. We have a Rapa Nui lady named Suvi who constantly translates into Rapa Nui, Pancho in Spanish, me in English, and we're trying to give these children a multilingual perspective of education. Well, we make them have field notes and make measurements. We get them in archaeological sites. So here's a quarry that was used to make stone tools that were used to carve the statues. Now everyone's interested in the statues, which I'll talk about later, but without these type of toki, you're not going to have the moai. So it's important that these kiddos understand what's a core, what's a flake, what's a hammerstone, what is debitage or the leftover product. So here we gently sit them inside, we let them feel the ancestors, and this was a really proud moment for me to see these kids graduate. This was the first class, and it's emotional because many of these kids have gone on and now they're studying degrees and now they're coming back to the island. And this is how we make change after contact. Working with the museum as well, other programs directed to the community, to the youth. I've done my best to really, sort of use my passion to show why it's valuable for these Rapa Nui people to be proud of their heritage, but also want to protect it for the future. And I'll make some comments of that when I get a little further in here. But the island is dominated by tourism. Basically, a tourism plane has not been on the island since March 23rd of 2020 through COVID. This is an island that is very small. There's about 8,000 people that live there. They only have two respirators on the island. So the mayor basically shut down the island, and I got lampooned there for about 11 months. And I was sort of, saved by a humanitarian plane. The difference with the death from COVID here, yes, we have 1 million Americans that have died, and every single one is a huge loss. But on Rapa Nui, if we had that amount of people die, we're going to lose an entire culture. We're going to lose an entire system of knowledge about the stars and planning and the ocean and animals. So that's why we need to protect everyone we can, because it may not affect you or directly affect your neighbor, but it may affect groups that are more vulnerable. And that's exactly why we need to protect. But before the island closed to COVID, I worked with one of the most sort of elaborate hotels on the island called Hotel Explora, a Chilean-based company. And this is their guide school. And again, for 2 years, we ran around the island teaching them English, how to properly guide, first aid, logistics, things that are very important because this is where the majority of the income of the island comes from. Some 85 to 90% is based on tourism. So these individuals are learning these techniques about proper guiding and how to reduce the cumulative impact of tourism on the island. Now, all of this stuff, that whole thing, you can find a lot of my work in a lot of different places, from academia to ResearchGate. For any college student out there, you definitely should be a member of those 2 pages. It's a little more legal than Sci-Fi, Sci-Hub. but the point here, there in my YouTube channel, you'll find a lot about my field work and investigation, publication, presentation. One of my favorite ones is called From the Field, where I basically take you out into the field of Rapa Nui, and you can actually see the sites. And while this is a more traditional PowerPoint, I do suggest you go there and you can see the island with your own eyes. And maybe that'll motivate you one day to see it with your own feet. And that would be my ultimate goal. Be looking in the future. I have a few publications also coming out. 2 of them are for children. One, we made a color book that was supported by Chilean's Minister of Culture and Arts, that I worked with a Rapa Nui artist named Veri Lobos Haoa. And we basically made black and white and color a book so children could see the site, their parents can read about it, and then they could color those sites appropriately. For the Aldea, or we'll say the high school there on Rapa Nui, we created an archaeological atlas for the children as well, or high school kiddos, because a lot of times those resources just don't exist. Chile at times that owns the island or annexed the island in 1888, for them, Chile's history starts, when Chile begins, not when Rapa Nui begins. So we wanted to have that. And then a big project that I'm very happy about is called Bajo la Lupa, or Under the Microscope, or magnifying lens. And basically here, it highlights my entire PhD. It's 9 years of work in one publication of 6,000 words. And an abstract of 200, So it's amazing. Our researchers these days, we have to go through so many years of research to publish one little thing. But it should be in the news and the media sometime soon. So be on the lookout for that. Okay, enough. Let's actually talk a little bit about Rapa Nui. Is my 40 minutes. So I'm about 3 minutes behind here. So this is just a general map of Oceania, or the Pacific, as we would call it. The Pacific has had three main migrations during the Pleistocene, um, during Lapita colonization, and then Maohi, or the Polynesians, that were the last bit of migration. Here's Rapa Nui, which is very close to the mainland of Chile, about 2,300 miles. But if you went straight up north from Rapa Nui, you would end up in Wyoming. And it's interesting that one of the most important American investigators, named William Malloy, he actually taught out of Wyoming. And it's a connection to him. And I'm very honored to follow in his footsteps. But Polynesia basically is just noted by the triangle of New Zealand, or Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, up to Hawaii, out to Rapa Nui. And we believe the center of sort of Polynesia is Tahiti and the Society Islands. It seems that many groups focus themselves there and then dispersed out to other areas. But we know by 1200 AD, people arrived to Rapa Nui. Now, inside this triangle, you probably already know something about Polynesia if you've seen the movie Moana. I'm sure most of you have. You know, Moana is this great seafarer who takes these huge double-hull canoes with the god Maui, and they go on this great adventure. Well, we have to be careful about cultural appropriation and how the movie tries to put all Polynesian culture in one. We need to be careful with simplifying the culture. But their navigation, they do a very good job. And they show that these Polynesians just didn't go in one boat. They were in complete, naval company with other boats. I mean, this is a complete fleet here, that you probably have your transport canoes, you'd have storage canoes, you'd have quicker fishing canoes. And it's through this technique and using things like the stars, celestial navigation, the currents, the waves, the animals, the stories. They used all these things to colonize one of the biggest areas of the world in less than 2,000 years. So I would argue these are some of the best navigators the world has seen. Something else that's quite famous for Polynesians are the ideas of their monumental architecture. In Rapa Nui, you'll see we call them ahu, but in other areas they're called heiau or marae, but they serve the similar purpose, which is to denote sacred and secular landscapes, to highlight rank and chiefs, but also to celebrate sort of rites of passages and births, marriages and deaths, and first fruit ceremonies. All these things would be done around here. I will have you look at this particular platform right here. This is in Raiatea, which is in Tahiti, and this specific platform is called Tapu Tapu Atea. And Tapu Tapu Atea is believed to be the center of Polynesia. And oral traditions say all of the chiefs from Polynesia came to this marae to celebrate the Maohi way of life, or the Polynesian way of life. And I find that very, very impactful, because it's from this one point that the Polynesians contacted all of the other islands. And that's something to think about. Now, usually within the monumental architecture, we'd have statuary. Most people believe that only Rapa Nui people carve statues, and that's not true. We see that statues are found all over of different materials, from wood, stone, which include basalt or ash, sometimes scoria. And, it's basically showing one thing: the ancestors, the humans that have come before us, the lineages, right? Native Americans believe you do something that will benefit 7 generations ahead of you, but you're honoring 7 generations behind you. And that's very similar to the Polynesians. They also honored the generations that would come by respecting the generations that had passed. So these statues are a way to highlight chiefly power, to memorize chiefs lists, and to really show that at the heart of it all, we're all human, and we always want to respect our ancestors. Now, when people ask, where did the Rapa Nui people come from? I just want to be very clear right here. They weren't aliens. I just want to come live to make sure we get that point. They're not aliens, okay? These are people that did this. Sometimes I get a little upset about that. So, but where are they most? Here, share that. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, one of the works that my advisor did at the University of Queensland, where I did my PhD, his name's Marshall Weisler, he investigated for his PhD a group of islands that's located 1,200 miles to the west of Rapa Nui, called we just call it the interaction sphere between Mangareva, which is right here, Pitcairn, which is this one, and Henderson. And what we see here, and his research showed, for about 500 years, people had to interact between these three islands because one island didn't have all the resources that one island needed. So they had to collaborate with other groups. So you can see here Gambier or Mangareva. It's a high island. It's the remnants of an old volcano that is submerged inside the ocean. And what happened is, at one time when the land was complete, that's how you form the coral reef around. But the island slowly breaks down through time. However, because there's a protective reef, there's pearl shells. There's other materials. There's rich biodiversity. There's types of you can have large populations there. But on the other side, the Pitcairn, it doesn't have that same structure. But what it has is beautiful basalt, which is a type of stone, igneous stone. And this basalt was used to make a variety of stone tools, right? It also had volcanic glass, very similar to obsidian. So if you've seen something like Game of Thrones or Minecraft, obsidian is found in a few places in the Pacific, and the Polynesians use it very frequently to create stone tools and the like. The point here is, without this interaction of the island, Rapa Nui probably was not colonized. These groups had to pool resources, pool human capital. They had to understand the ebb and flow of things like El Nino and La Nina. We also have the movement of the Little Ice Age and the medieval warming period that are global events that are probably also affecting micro migration. But around 1000 AD, 1100 AD, the group leaves from these islands and they continue to trek out east, and they find Rapa Nui. And let me tell you, it's one of the craziest places I've ever been to. It has the name Easter Island because it was found April 5th, 1722, and actually this is the 300-year anniversary since contact to the island. But the people themselves call the island Rapa Nui, which could mean the big paddle. It also could mean maybe another island in Polynesia called Rapa, and this one's a little bit bigger. So basically, anytime you see the word Nui in Polynesia, you know big. So if you go to Hawaii and someone says, "Oh, aloha nui," they're giving you a big aloha. If you see someone say Manu Nui, that's a big bird. So that's a cognate or a word that exists about Polynesia, further showing their connections. However, we have the term Te Pito o Te Henua, which basically means the belly button of the world, which is an interesting concept if you think about it. This is the most isolated place, but here the people believe that they were the belly button because that's where the most sacred bit of mana comes out from. Your mana is imbued from your father, it goes into the mother, and then as you get the mana from your mother, that belly button and then umbilical cord are very sacred in Polynesia. A lot of times the umbilical cord had so much mana that the everyday person couldn't touch it. They would need a specialist like an iwiatua or like a priest that would have to come in and take that remains and tuck it somewhere or burn it because it was so full of mana. The island itself is the size of Washington, D.C. We have about 16 or 15 miles on the west coast. The northern coast about 15, 16, and 22 on the bottom. So it's much larger than people believe. Here's the runway, which is the largest runway in Polynesia. It was actually created by NASA. So if the plane needed to land there, it could sort of land there in something something went horrible. This is the town of Hangaroa right here, where the majority of the population lives. But it's quite sad because if you go to any other Polynesian island, you'll see colonization in many of the bays. Well, when the sheep herding company was there and when Chile took power, they pushed everybody inside the island and basically made them live in a jail. They rocked off the walls. You only had a pass to go out to see your ancestors, to go to the sites. So we have to remember that contact between groups often results in control. and seeing the pattern of Hangaroa shows what happens after contact. The problem I always find is that there's so much crap and and sort of sensationalism in our media that we really don't know about Rapa Nui. And I have a whole lecture about these type of activities. Most likely, if you have a child, you've seen something like Hop, where the Easter Bunny's on Easter Island, and in that movie, all the Moai are facing outwards towards the ocean. That's not true. 90%, 95% of all the Moai face inland because they're looking at the people. They're the ancestors looking at the living folks. Or something so disrespectful like the night at the museum where he says dum dum one dum dum, right? That image to me right there just makes me vomit because it doesn't really represent the proud Polynesian people. Or this guy right here is a total clown, who's never even been to Easter Island, who pretends he knows stuff. So you can look at any of these books, Jared Diamond, Katiki, you can look at these and see what the narrative is about Easter Island. And I could slowly go through all these and debunk them one by one, but I don't have that time. What we have seen, though, is people trying to debunk it. And it's amazing because we have so much research about Rapa Nui. This is just a little cut from Wikipedia showing 121 resources if you want to know more. You can click into these and actually see, proper peer-reviewed journals or sort of, edited manuscripts that really highlight. Now, while the outside world has written a lot about it, one thing that is sort of difficult compared to other Polynesian islands is that there's a limited oral tradition. The people still speak their language. There still are oral traditions. But at one moment in 1877, there was only 110 people living on Easter Island. And it was these 110 that had to keep the language going, to keep the culture going. And they've done a great job. The last study I saw was 25% of the island are fluent in Rapa Nui, and there's a big push to teach children that language to keep the culture alive, because without language, there is no culture. We also have a lot of archaeological dating. So carbon-14 is a technique that's only used on things that were alive at one time. I cannot use carbon-14 on the statues to date them because there's no organic material. Every day that you're alive, you absorb carbon. When you die, you start losing that carbon. And archaeologists can note that change in your carbon levels, and therefore we can date you. And as you know, you older ladies out there, the older you get, archaeologists, the more interested we are. So don't ever feel bad you're getting older, because someone's going to be interested in you. So a variety of dating all throughout. And what this helps us do with all these individual dates coming from a whole bunch of different context type is help us build a timeline, what we call a culture history. The problem is with Rapa Nui, there's a lot of researchers, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of pride. And you can tell just if you sample a group of Rapa Nui archaeologists, some of them have a different story. There's no general consensus of when exactly the island was sort of settled, when it has expansion, and then when it's quote unquote either collapses before contact or after contact. So you can see science is something that's constantly in action. Science, the process of science is never done. Once a conclusion is made, you reformulate hypotheses, you retest new variables. And over 20 years, what I've done is created a simple timeline that works for me. We see initial colonization from 11 to 1200 current era. We see an intense development, and this is probably supported through things like the medieval warming period, which we have a lot of rain. So once they got there, this island was beautiful, full of palm trees and birds, no land animals, but a lot of sea mammals and about almost 200 different fish around the island. And they looked like they really hit it hard. But we see the big megalithic development, the big statues, the big monumental architecture from 1300 to 1722, which is contact. So what I'm telling you here is that the island did not collapse until the Europeans came. Just like we saw with the Native North Americans here, as they were pushed and they were living their lives. They hadn't collapsed. They weren't dead. Well, this is very similar to what we see for the Rapa Nui people. And we have tons of ethnohistoric records and missionaries and whalers that show that the island was still fruitful. It had agricultural plots. There were leaders. And it seems that the island was quite, in good standing. Contact 72 by the Dutch, and then the near collapse between 1867 and 77. And this is where we see genocide, ethnocide, murder, poisoning of Rapa Nui leaders. It was a real travesty that we don't really talk about. But since that point, they've been surviving and thriving. The Rapa Nui people just ended their big festival called Tapati, which is a 2-week festival that celebrates their culture. They've done it the last 2 years without tourists because no one could get there. But that just shows us they're still proud, they're still alive, they're still moving forward after contact. So let's just talk a little bit about this timeline for my last 20 minutes. What we see is the Maohi arrival in these large Polynesian canoes, these catamarans, these double hull canoes, probably between 1100 and 1200. And we have that dating through multiple means. We can look at the oral tradition. We can look at the chief's genealogy. We can look at carbon-14 dating. And all of these are telling us that Hotu Matua, which is the first chief, he comes to the island in 2 canoes. He lands at the island and he starts the culture. Now, when Captain Cook was there, Hodges was his artist. And Hodges drew a Rapa Nui chief of the time with the large, perhaps headdress, white feathers of the chief, elongated ears from earplugs. Well, this is the last chief that died on the island, Riraroko Tuki Valentino. And when I look at these 2 men, I see so many similarities that's showing that continuation and not collapse. So the chief lands in Hangarau, which is one of only 2 beaches of Rapa Nui that's created between the mixing of sort of the breakdown of volcanoes, the breakdown of coral, and it creates sort of this pink sand. This is the afternoon beach, and this is the morning beach, because going this way is where the sun rises. So you sort of snorkel and spearfish here, and then you make the way for the sun to be here. So that's the hardest thing when you're an archaeologist. You usually burn your feet as you walk on the beach. No, I'm just kidding. This is what it looks like in another view. Here's Ahu Now, Turehuke, which is another platform. There's another platform right here. There's another. They're all over because this was the beach of the kings. This is where the chief starts the culture. This is where the most important clan, the Miru, will locate themselves. And you can imagine this huge double hull canoe landing right up here, crashing on the beach, and starting the culture as we know. But what's really cool is that all the Moai at one time had eyes. And these are called mata. And it's interesting because the clan is also called mata. So what we have here is the eyes of the ancestors are watching the clan. And that's something very important. So we have the Moai, we have the Pukau, we have the Ahu, and all of these are part of that sacred Polynesian monumental architecture. It's just here in Rapa Nui, they probably had the best carvers for some of the best stone located in Polynesia, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about mata as we go on. But underneath the ancestors, in this picture, you can see the eyes are not carved out, representing the chiefs. Look underneath. Rapa Nui is limited land, so you can't build horizontally. You have to build vertically. So here what we see is multiple layers of generations and generations of chiefs and workers building this up. And most likely this culture, after it arrived to this island, existed for 500 years without any other contact. They were able to continue their lifeways. And one thing they did very well was build these plazas, platforms, ahu, center platforms, moai, and pukau. There's a very complex social political organization that influences the ideology, it influences the economy. And we can imagine these aren't just, as we would say, Indians with feathers sticking out of their head. These are very complex groups with complex mechanisms. And one thing that we see is the elite class created by the Ariki. So if you go to Hawaii, you'll hear the Ali'i because they're a similar cognate, because these are what we see the chiefs. The big chief, the secondary chief, they live in Anakena, but underneath him and them, we have the Iviatua, which are priests, and then localized chief of each clan called Kanata Honui, the clan man. We have Maori, not like New Zealand Maori that have an accent, but these are your specialists. These are your tool makers, your gardeners, the master sales wayfinders like Maui. But we do have a warrior class on Rapa Nui. We actually have two warriors. We have the Matatoa and the Paoa. And it's interesting because we don't have a lot of defensive structures on Rapa Nui like in New Zealand. You know, we are quite unaware if these are just sort of peacekeepers and police officers, because what we argue is that most of the warfare on Rapa Nui doesn't start the sort of clan warfare until Europeans. But maybe these individuals are protecting borders, resource sectors. Then lower worker levels, the hurumanu that are in the ocean and the land, and then kio, which is not really a slave, but it's like a servant. And sometimes a kio would be honored to be working with a tanaka honui. So sometimes we don't always want to think about how we organize our lives. Sometimes groups are a little bit different. Here's a map that was created by a British ethnographer or anthropologist named Catherine Rutledge. She was in the island from 1914 to 1915, and her book, The Mystery of Easter Island, is one of the coolest reads. If you're looking for something to pick up, check out Catherine Rutledge, The Mystery of Easter Island, and it highlights her almost 2-year odyssey throughout the Pacific and her stay on the island for I think 17 months. Well, through her work, she started to organize where all the clans were organized, you know, where the boundary markers were at, who were the important people. But let's not forget that this is 1914, 15. This is when the island had already had contact and radically changed. When we do other techniques, like if we look at archaeological distribution and ideas of clan, it's a little bit different. If we look at what the islanders themselves think about the island being organized through ethno-linguistic means, there's actually more clans. So the point here is that although we do research, we always had to continue to do more research and see different ways to see the past. But just like the timeline that I highlighted in the beginning of this presentation, there's always debate about these bits of organization. And we have to keep at it, keep checking the facts. I guess, for this last 15, I'm only a minute behind. For this last 15, I just want to dial into the moai. It's the most common questions that I get. Here's a variety of moai that you can see from different platforms like Ahuakivi, which is one of the unique ones that faces the ocean, a little bit later of a platform, a solar and celestial organized platform called Purio Renga, Now, which you see the platform of the chiefs, Kahai at sunset, and basically this photo just comes where I used to live. Rano Doraku, the main quarry, which I'll talk about, that all the statues were carved from. Moai Paro, which is the largest moai at almost 30 feet long. Ahu Vaihu, which is a great example of a powerful southern coast clan. And then the most dominant of them all, Ahu Tongariki, that at one time had 30 moai that was destroyed by a tsunami in 1960. It was restored in the 90s by a team from Chile, from Japan that loaned the crane, and also a team from Poland. But the whole point is that there's more than I'm just showing you here. There's almost 313 of these platforms all over the island. And some of them are different. Some are meant to hold the statues. Some are meant to bury. Some are meant to organize clan lines. So again, although we might think Ahu is very uniform, they were different in their function, okay? And we see them pretty much all over the island. And the research that I've done is basically focused on the northwest coast, the southern coast, and then a lot of quarry work that I've done all throughout the island, basically. But what's interesting is that we think, everyone says, oh, well, the island collapsed by 1722. They're all dead and they pushed over their statues in warfare. Well, no, that's not correct. Because if you actually go to the ethnohistoric record, here's La Perouse in 1786, a Frenchman who comes there. And sure enough, he has pictures of Moai still standing on the platform. So they were not all pushed down. Here's the Europeans, and this is the classic. Check out this Rapa Nui guy. He's trying to steal a hat. Hats were very valuable. Hats showed rank. So here you have a high-ranking individual trying to get maybe a mirror. You have others trying to figure out what's happening as this contact happens between these groups. Even Hodges comes earlier. Look at the majority of Moai still standing in the background. So if the premise of the collapse model is that, the island collapsed because we got to cut down the trees to move the statues and therefore they fought and they all killed themselves before Europeans come, I call BS. Because we can go back, we can do the research, we can see these statues are still standing. Here's a variety of Moai. We have them carved from different types of material. The majority, though, some 96% are carved from a volcanic ash or a tuff called topolapoli. But the Rapa Nui people also experimented with scoria, with tractite, and with basalt, which these are very difficult to carve. Scoria is a little bit softer, but this stuff's like butter. And they were able to carve almost 1,000 statues, pardon me. They almost carved 1,000 statues over their time. And we see an evolutionary change from more naturalistic statues that look more human through more of an elongation and the typical view that you see today. And most likely the reason is because it's easier to carve straight lines than curves when you deal with this stuff. So it seems that they obviously were getting better with their techniques. They were able to elongate. And the largest statue that we have is called Tetotonga or El Gigante, and he's over 20, he's almost 22 meters, or we'll say, 66 feet long. There's one Moai on Easter Island that's 6 stories tall, so bigger than most of the buildings we have here in DuPage County. But there's digital Moai. I challenge you to go on your phone right now, whatever system you have, and you're going to see that even the world represents Moai differently. And that always gets me excited. I'm a fan of Samsung because I have a Samsung phone, and I think this is the best one because they got the grass on the bottom. They did a great job. I don't know what's up with here with Bob Marley Moai, but you can see this face, this human face in all of them, and it really comes from these 1,000 statues. So let's dial in about sort of carving and transport for these last 10 minutes. So Manga Io, which is the large collapsed volcano, where the statues are 96% of them are carved. You'll notice this little bit right here, and you'll notice this little bit. Statues are carved from here to here. And if you look very closely, right? Right here is the biggest statue that you can actually still see carved in there. That's 66 feet right there, okay? Now on the outer flank, you can see that there's sort of 3 main areas of this process. The first is the carving area that you can see a lot of micro quarries, and anywhere that you see white there, stone has been moved out and water has leached out. So we can tell right away that's a micro quarry. Then they were moved in sort of this detailing area where large holes were made. And here's where all the Moai are mostly looking towards the ocean. And that's because they're in their final process of being cleared out and cleaned. And then we have the transport area. And that's where Moai then are going to get ready to be moved throughout their zones. But again, these are human beings carving these, not aliens. I can see all the stone tools. I can see evidence for carving. I can see the human beings that did it, okay? This is from Heyerdahl's work. He wanted to see how long it would take them to carve a Moai. He took 10 people, gave them 1 week, and they did this amount of work in 1 week. So you can imagine a Moai probably took no more than 3 to 6 months to carve and be ready to go because the stone was that malleable. We see multiple micro quarries. Here's some detail. Now, while you look at this one, you might be able to see an eye, a nose here and there, a smile. But if you look at this map, look at all of the numbers. They're literally everywhere. Now, the reason why some of these weren't finished, sometimes they cracked in the process. Some argue that some Moai were meant to stay in the maunga or the volcano. Here's another one. Look how much material has been moved out from this micro quarry. And right here, there's the big boy. That's a 6-story Moai, estimated at about 250 tons. The oral tradition says this Moai was going to be moved, but I don't know how, because it's a big one. Now, carving usually starts up in that micro quarry area. They usually design the nose. They carve from the nose to create themselves sort of a keel. And then from the keel, you actually have to smack that away. But before so, you can use sort of a rope and maybe a pulley or lever system. And on top of the Rano Raraku or Manga Io, there's a whole bunch of large holes in areas where rope could be easily put inside to help slide down the moai once it's taken off its keel inside its designated hole. And then from here, you can detail, you can clean the keel, you can work the neck. They have a variety of materials they can use for rope. A lot of it comes from the how sort of branch, or it's sort of it reminds me of like a rose sort of bush at times. But you basically peel away that, you smash it out. You can link that rope in with human hair, and this is what Captain Cook collected of the rope. And you probably braid lots of these together to get that moai from its keel, slide it down, put it into the big hole, and then get ready for transport. This is what one of those prepared holes look like. Here's the famous Tor Heyerdahl with a lot of natives that he has. They dug this out. Look how pristine those hands are. Between the hands, you have what's called a hammy or a loincloth. Most of the moai were fat with sort of saggy breasts because that was the symbol of power. You were, if you didn't work that much, your fingernails grew, you got a big fat belly. Reminds me a lot of our 10-year profs. They just sit there, But this moai is quite amazing. But the thing that always bugs me is we got to look to aliens to solve these problems, that it's aliens that move these statues, because there's no way Polynesians can do that. And again, I call BS because I've seen the ingenuity over 20 years of these Rapa Nui people and how they could have easily transported a statue. And more so if you think about the obelisks in Egypt that are sometimes triple the size, and that was 3,000 years before or 4,000 years before the Rapa Nui people. And they were moving statues and large obelisks, and no one questions their ability. Well, it's because we're sometimes just ignorant about the groups around us. So here's a moai slowly walking its way as one of the techniques that Hunt and Lippo talk about. But we have a variety of techniques that are used. The oral tradition tells us moai were moved by the mana of the chief. But obviously, that's a little far-fetched because how can you, supernaturally raise something and move it? But that's why you bring in aliens. However, others have talked about using a sledge, sort of a Y frame that you can sort of use a V frame to drag the moai. And every time the moai drags forward, pick up the Y frame, put it forward. Sometimes on rollers, sometimes dragging, the walking technique, the refrigerator method. So every time you move your refrigerator, you do it in a moai technique, side to side. The point is, they didn't just use one technique. They used multiple techniques, okay? And that's what I want to keep you guys in that mind. They also had roads. These are the moai roads that you can go from the main quarry and then be able to move. And a lot of investigation has been done to see where exactly these roads at. And a lot of times these roads cross-cut other clans, other clan lands. So it shows people had to have communication. They had to have contact. This wasn't just done in a vacuum. And it takes all of these groups coming together to honor the ancestors. Once you get to the platform, you have to raise it on top of the ahu. So again, this is from Heyerdahl. This is the first platform that was raised by an outside investigator. And it's quite simple. You have your large poles. You have a variety of rock. And you sort of lift up the moai a little bit, slide in a rock. Lift up the moai a little bit, slide in a rock. Lift up the moai a little bit, slide a rock. Lift up the moai, lift up the moai, rock. And then boom, 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 boom. And then it gets to that nice position and it slowly falls into place. And then what you can do with all the stone afterwards is use it in the ahu. So they recycle this material. They show how they were very intelligent. They're not going to go get a whole bunch of new stone. No, they would just take this and put that right inside their ahu. In my last little 2 minutes here, I just want to show you that these are all the moai, 17 moai that have been moved off the world through colonialism, through post-contact. The majority in Europe, we have 2 in the United States, there's 2 in New Zealand, and there are 5, but now 4 that are going to be in Chile. Because as of 2 days ago, a moai, an Aringa Ora, the living face of the ancestors, is moving back to Chile. It's actually going back home to be with all of his other ancestors, right? And this is huge news. This is great. This is showing what post-colonialism could be, or neo-colonialism, or the end of contact when people repatriate. Not only human remains, but living ancestors like we see here, okay? So I want you to think about Rapa Nui like this, that it was a vibrant place. It was sociopolitically, economically, and ideologically complex. The elite there dominated the sphere for 500 years. And it wasn't until contact that we see this collapse. And I can tell you, this island is about continuation, not collapse, because I know the Rapa Nui people are still alive. I know that they are still vibrant. They're strong. They've taught me so much in this life. And I'm really appreciative I can tell their story. So thank you guys. Maururu Korua. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so anyone, if you want to, you should be able to unmute yourself or just put some questions in the chat.
Oh, I got the chat here. Thank you, Tanis. He's one of my students. Appreciate that. So glad this Moai's going home. You're right, bud. And we could talk about that in class as well. So thanks for being here. Right on, Cheryl. Thanks for being here as well. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the Moai. Yes, no questions. That means no one understood anything. I love it. That's the best. No, just push it through.
Yeah. No, that was really great. I mean, I saw just a few days ago about the repatriation. So that I'm sure involved a lot of negotiation with the Chilean government and the institutions involved. But that's really great to hear.
It really started, that museum, the National History Museum in Chile, really started by first dealing with the Iwi Tapuna, which is the bones, the human remains. And that was super important to start that process. Now, it's sort of a double-edged sword. There are some Rapa Nui people that don't want the Moai to come home. You know, like in any place, you're going to have pros and cons, right? You know, right now there's a lot of wildfires on the island caused by the islanders, and they rip through archaeological sites and burn Moai. Some argue, why are we going to bring Moai in other places when we can't even take care of the Moai that are here on the island? And you'll have the one Rapa Nui that's just anti-Chile, anti-gringos, and he'll scream at you, you know, get all my Moai off your country. I want all my ancestors back. But then you'll have like a little more educated Rapa Nui who's been around the world that'll come up to you like on the sly and be like, Dale, they call me Ma'a Ma'a, which means crazy. And, you know, they'll say something like, Dale, it's good that Moai is there because not everyone's going to come to my island. But for one day in their nation, they can go visit one of my ancestors. They can read about my story. So it's sort of an ambassador between cultures. So just because everyone is up on a roar, great, this shows there are some Rapa Nui that understand contact could also be in another place and not necessarily on East Island.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring up, like the complexity of it. That's great.
Cool. So to the islands for events. Let me just write that. Excellent, President Bravo. I have a class. Cool. Thank you. Right on, Lisa. I always appreciate it. All right. So I'm sorry, everyone's going. Okay. So, oh yeah. Oh, what up? So do you hope to have a study abroad relationship with either DuPage or NCC? I tried with DuPage. It's just really difficult to get that going there. In the future, I do hope at North Central to take a team there, you know, to work on some of my quarry work and some 3D scanning. We also have a project to do some remote sensing of a historic cemetery, trying to identify all the ancestors. So yes, I really hope to get you there. She's one of my interns working on another project here for DuPage County. So that's awesome.
Great.
I love you, Liz. Thank you. To the island for events. Yeah. Well, I want to go. Actually, next year we have planned to go to the Pitcairn Islands, which we talked about on another expedition looking for petroglyphs. And I was chosen to be on that because I can sort of live in a hole in the middle of nowhere. So they're highlighting my skill set of living in holes.
That's great.
Real interesting stuff. Right on. Cool. Thank you, Samantha. See you in class. Cool.
Fantastic.
That's awesome. And then Sonia as well, I think she could talk. She's doing her PhD on the island and has spent multiple years there as well. I believe she was working on some more ethnomedicine, if I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, from our last time we talked playing cards. But, you know, I maybe you could highlight a little bit of if people are interested, you don't have to go. This is another expert in the field as well.
I don't know about expert. I think you're much more of an expert than I am. But yeah, thanks. Great, Dale. It was awesome. And I'm looking forward to your presentation in the Netherlands in a couple months. So that's going to be great. But yeah, I was there for almost 17 months. Also got stranded during COVID for a little bit, but I didn't really want to leave, so it was totally fine. But
well, you had your boyfriend there, of course.
Well, you know, no, he was fine. He loves it too, which is great. You can't go there without falling in love with it, really. But so yeah, I was looking at how the ways in which the Rapa Nui protect and use and really participate in their ancestral medicine and healing systems, and that it highlights how we have to look at health when we're talking about fighting for causes of self-determination and basically to be healthy is to be powerful. And so the ways in which the To'ote, which are the doctors, the healers there, the ways in which they heal themselves and heal their community, and sort of their ethics and responsibilities of care, their goals, their objectives, they align with all of the other organizations in the island, including the economic and political ones. And you know, by being healthy and by wanting to heal and connect with your ancestors and family, it's part of this undercurrent, which is equally arguing for more ethical land rights and access and everything from, you know, just the autonomy of being able to run your own community is really important. I really think there's a big connection there with health and medicine that is really important. So
awesome. I can't wait to read your thesis. I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Adam, thank you to everyone as well for your time. I really appreciate, you know, coming on. I know I was there to the minute there, but I had timed it out to you know, just end right there. And I wish I would have given some more time for questions, but most people can find me through my means, and I'm always happy to answer any questions that come my way.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be putting this up probably in the next couple of weeks on YouTube on our Humanities Fest channel. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And thanks again for participating.
Cool beans. Yorana korua, haupo korua, kau hariba riba, Yorana.
Yorana moruru.
Hey ya.